The Batman Part 2. This is a movie that has been under so much speculation because it has been almost 5 years since the first one came out. And we actually had an interview that Matt Reeves did recently with Josh Horowitz, and a lot was revealed in that interview. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Every single thing that Matt Reeves talked about, hinted at, and even more. But before we get into anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, hit that noti bell. Alright, The Batman Part 2. Getting into a little bit about Matt Reeves and what he did talk about in that interview. He said a lot of very interesting things. So obviously, probably the biggest thing and what everyone most wants to know about is who the main villain is going to be. There has been a ton of speculation about who that villain could be, whether it is Hush, the Court of Owls, maybe Mr. Freeze, Poison Ivy. Now, obviously, if they were to use Poison Ivy or Mr. Freeze, it would be a different take on those characters, just because for them to fit in this universe, a very grounded, non-fantastical universe, having someone who can control plants or having someone who is walking around in a mobile refrigerator would be really, really difficult. And using a cold gun, again, would be really difficult. So that being said, I think those two options are pretty much out. It's pretty safe to say. Now, going off of what Matt Reeves specifically said in the interview, obviously I'll put little snippets of the text on the screen, but just to paraphrase a little bit, one of the most interesting things that Matt Reeves did say is that he wants to have a villain that's never really been done before. Now, a lot of people are hearing this and they are kind of going back and looking at all of the villains that we've gotten thus far and ruling those characters out. And I personally disagree with this because of how he phrased it. He said, hasn't really been done before. Now, he could have come out and said, yeah, we're gonna do someone who's never been done before, but he didn't. He decided to use those exact words. And I think it could be for two reasons. One of which, it could have just been a fluke and he did really mean like, hey, we are gonna do a villain never seen. Or it could mean that they are going to do a different take on a villain that we have seen, and maybe a villain that we've seen that hasn't been the prominent role, the central focus of the film, and the main villain of the film. So that's why, to me, we realistically have about 4 to 5 options for who the main villain could be. And then obviously we're going to talk about a little bit more what Matt Reeves went on to say in that interview, because I think that helps us narrow down who the main villain is going to be. So first up, in my opinion, of who is very likely to be the main villain of this film is the Penguin. Now, this would go into the category of him specifically using those words because obviously Batman Returns, we had Danny DeVito as the Penguin. Now, that was a different version of the Penguin than we have in this universe. He was a mutant. He was seen as a freak. He wasn't really a mob boss in that way. He was running for mayor. He didn't really have control of the underworld, whereas in this, and especially after the Penguin show, whether you loved it or hate it, I know a lot of people ended up really, really enjoying it. I have my own thoughts on it, personally. I just hate that they call him Oz Cobb. Come on. He's Oswald Cobblepot. Come on. But that being said, I think he could be set up to be the main antagonist in this film in a really, really cool way. And what I mean by that is they could do a story similar to the Batman Arkham Origins game, where they had Black Mask as the quote-unquote big bad, who I know later was revealed to be the Joker. But still, for a while, the premise was that Black Mask was trying to take down Batman because he was ruining his organization. He was screwing things up. So now that the Penguin is the kind of pseudo leader of the underworld because of what happened to Carmine Falcone in the first Batman film, it could set up the Penguin realizing that the Batman is a threat, and not only that, but a threat that they need to deal with sooner rather than later. And how do they do that? Obviously, the Penguin is not going to do that himself. He has the money, the capital, and the connections to have people do that for him. And who could he get to do that? Well, that goes into even more so characters that really have not shown up in live action. You could have a contracted to kill scenario where you have Deathstroke, Deadshot, Copperhead, and maybe a couple other lower level villains like the Electrocutioner, maybe even Firefly, ones that have smaller roles, and then you have maybe one or two of those assassins have the big role and be the central focus. And then at the very end, the Penguin is the actual big bad, the end-all be-all boss fight at the end. I think this could be really likely, and it could fit with the universe that Matt Reeves has created. Now, do I see them going this route? Unfortunately, I think this is probably the least likely, even though it's the one that, to me, makes the most sense outside of two of these choices on this list. That being said, that brings me to the next option, and that would be the Scarecrow. Now, I know, again, this is also a character that we have gotten. We got him in the Dark Knight trilogy. However, he was not the big bad. He was not the main antagonist. And a lot of people could say that he wasn't 100% true to his character. Cillian Murphy was great as the Scarecrow. I thought he was awesome. He did an amazing job, especially for that universe. But this could give us a way to explore a different side of the Scarecrow and dive deeper into him having that classic comic book look, him having the hat, looking like an actual scarecrow. And we know that Matt Reeves is very fascinated in Bruce Wayne and Batman exploring their psychology, and this could do that. The first film definitely emphasized the strain and the exploration of Batman's mind, but this could take us that much deeper to where if he gets affected by the fear toxin, it could take us through the events of his past. It could take us through maybe some of his training, maybe some of the fears that he's expressed over the years. Because again, we didn't get a full origin story in this universe, and that's not to say that we need one, but those couple of flashbacks could really help connecting the past to the present and to showing what this version of Bruce Wayne has gone through and will go through on screen. And again, I just think that dynamic, and even he could be a physical threat too. Some versions of Jonathan Crane can give Batman in some iterations a run for his money, at least a little bit. Again, not to the extent of Bane or Deathstroke or anyone like that, but definitely more so than someone like the Riddler, who was the villain of the first one. So again, do I think this is the very likely and the most likely one to be the main villain? No. Do I think it's probably more likely than my first option? Yes. I think it's very feasible. An honorable mention, honestly, would be Hugo Strange as well. I really did think he would be the main villain when we were getting an Arkham Asylum show. However, considering that show never happened and it's kind of in limbo whether it's officially canceled or not canceled, I think him being the main villain just wouldn't fit. He would have to get introduced and you'd have to explore Arkham Asylum. It would be way too much, and we know that Matt Reeves wants this trilogy, because he does want it to be a trilogy, but he wants it to stay focused on Batman. He's made comments even in this interview where he says films in the past have that first movie that's really focused on Batman, and then along the way you start to focus more on the antagonist, which is understandable because you have that first film with Batman, but he's very fascinated in exploring the full journey of Batman and Bruce Wayne all the way through. Again, will we get 3 movies? We don't know. We'll have to see how the second one does, but he at least would like to explore that over the next 2 movies at least. That being said, the one that I think is pretty likely for a couple of reasons, and to be honest, if they are not the big bad of the second movie, I'm about 95% sure they would be the big bad for the third movie. And in my opinion, I think this group of villains would serve best if they did get a third movie, and if they waited until the third movie to introduce these characters. And that's the Court of Owls, and more specifically Talon. And obviously that would be a huge physical threat to Batman, but also it could help tear down the establishment even more. You could see how much of Gotham is truly corrupt by seeing how many people are associated with the Court of Owls. And that's why I say, in my opinion, I think it would be way better to do the Court of Owls in the third movie, because you could explore different characters in the second movie and characters from the first movie that end up being members of the Court of Owls, which will have such a bigger impact in the long run. And one of those people, in my opinion, would be Bella Real. And what I think would be an awesome twist would be if it's revealed to her actually being the leader of the Court of Owls, the Grand Master. Again, in different iterations and in different comics, the Grand Master is portrayed as a different name sometimes, but I know in the Batman vs. Robin movie, they do call her the Grand Master, so I'm gonna roll with that in this video. That being said, do I really think these characters will appear in the second one? Unfortunately, I don't. The only reason I could really see it is because Matt Reeves has said he has interest in the Court of Owls, and when doing press for the first movie, Robert Pattinson was asked multiple times about potential villains, and multiple times his answer was the Court of Owls. He said they are such fascinating characters, and it would be a really fun time to explore that story and that world. So again, in my opinion, I think they will be the main villains of the third film, and preference, I would prefer them to be the main villain of the third film rather than the second. But hey, if we get them in the second film, I won't complain. I still think it'll be cool. That brings us to, in my opinion, what is the most likely villain for Matt Reeves' The Batman, Part 2. And that is Hush. Obviously, in the first one, with all the corruption happening and Matt Reeves' comments about wanting the second one to focus a lot more on Bruce Wayne and his personal connections and his past, how can you do that? Well, you can introduce a character who has a vendetta against Bruce Wayne. And who would have a vendetta against Bruce Wayne? Thomas Elliot, the son of Edward Elliot, who, if you remember from the first movie, was killed as a result of something that happened between Falcone and Thomas Wayne. Obviously, we know, the audience, that it wasn't Thomas Wayne's intention to get this reporter killed. However, is Thomas Elliot going to see it that way? No. Villains rarely ever see anything with reason, especially if vengeance or revenge is involved. So that could really give us an interesting dynamic between Thomas Elliot and Bruce Wayne, and especially if he finds out that Bruce Wayne is Batman, and him just trying to tear down not only his life as Batman, but also his life as Bruce Wayne. Because as we know from the first film, Wayne Enterprises isn't this great big conglomerate that is just a juggernaut doing great. It's actually struggling, and a big reason for that is because Bruce Wayne is mostly scarce and away from the company. So this could be a way for Thomas Elliot to shed light on that and kind of put Bruce's feet to the fire as to what are you doing with all your time. And obviously I don't think he'll reveal to the world that Bruce Wayne is Batman, especially not in the second film, but something similar to that could happen, or the potential risk for that happening could be a plot point in this film. Now, that being said, would I enjoy it if Hush was the big bad in this film? Yes, I think that would be cool, especially if Thomas Elliot does have some sort of training in his background to let him not only go toe-to-toe with Bruce Wayne from a mental standpoint, but also go toe-to-toe with Batman from a physical standpoint. And obviously, as we saw in the Batman Hush animated movie, he does have that capability. Now, I know in that universe it ended up being the Riddler, but in the comics, Thomas Elliot is traditionally Hush, and he does have the ability to go toe-to-toe with Batman. And he does a lot of times dismantle a lot of Bruce Wayne and Batman's life. So seeing that dynamic unfold on screen would be really cool, and in my opinion be really interesting. Some other things that Matt Reeves did say in that interview too was talking about specifically Robin and the potential exploration, or if he ever considered exploring Robin. And what he said was pretty interesting. He said, obviously, when going into scripts and writing script for a new movie, especially when it's a sequel, you take a look at everything. You take a look at any comic, and you consider pretty much every avenue that you could. Now, do I think, in my opinion, that Robin is going to appear in this film? No. Unfortunately, as much as I love Dick Grayson, as anyone on this channel will know, Dick Grayson Nightwing is my favorite DC superhero, so I would love it if he appeared in this universe. However, I don't see him appearing in the second film, unless it's at the very end of the film, and that would kind of show Bruce Wayne going to see the Flying Graysons, and maybe it being even like an end credit scene or a post credit scene type of scenario, where then the third film would be a Batman and Robin type of story. And again, especially if you have the Court of Owls, that would fit perfectly. But let me know what all of you think. Who do you think is going to be the big bad villain of the Batman Part 2? Would you like to see Robin in the Batman Part 2? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And I'll see all of you in the next video. Goodbye.